Marcus Thompson stood perfectly still at his post outside Buckingham Palace, his red uniform pressed to perfection, his tall black hat casting a shadow over his weathered face. Tourists snapped photos and tried to make him laugh, but Marcus remained as motionless as a statue. What they didn't know was that behind those steady brown eyes lay the mind of someone who had spent countless hours perfecting a skill that would soon shock the entire British military. The other guards often whispered about Marcus during their breaks. At 32, he was older than most when he joined the Queen's Guard, and his quiet nature made him stand out among the usually boisterous soldiers. While others shared stories of their weekend adventures or complained about the long hours standing in the London heat, Marcus simply listened, offering only small nods or brief smiles. "That Thompson fellow is odd," Sergeant Williams would say to the others. "Been here 3 years and barely says 10 words a day. Makes me wonder what he's hiding." The other guards would chuckle and agree. Marcus had become something of a mystery among the ranks, known more for his silence than his skills. What his fellow guards didn't realize was that Marcus spent his free time at a small shooting range 40 miles outside London. Every weekend, while others were at pubs or visiting family, Marcus would drive his old blue sedan to the countryside, carrying a worn leather bag that contained his most prized possessions, his grandfather's hunting rifle and a collection of competition-grade ammunition. Marcus had grown up in a small village in Yorkshire, where his grandfather had taught him to shoot when he was just 8 years old. The old man had been a sniper in World War II, and he passed down not just the technical skills of marksmanship, but also the patience and discipline that came with it. "A good shot isn't about the gun, boy," his grandfather would say, adjusting Marcus's stance in their backyard. "It's about controlling your breathing, your heartbeat, your mind. Everything else is just noise." Those lessons had stuck with Marcus through his teenage years, through his time at university studying engineering, and even when he decided to join the military at 29 after his grandfather passed away. The Queen's Guard had seemed like an honorable way to serve, and the discipline reminded him of the values his grandfather had instilled in him. At the shooting range, Marcus was a different person. The range master, an elderly man named George, had watched Marcus's skills develop over the years and was constantly amazed by his progress. "Never seen anything like it," George would tell his wife over dinner. "That quiet lad can hit targets at distances that would make professional snipers jealous. And he does it with equipment that's older than both of us." Marcus's routine was always the same. He would arrive at the range just as it opened, set up at the longest distance available, and spend hours in perfect concentration. Other shooters would sometimes gather to watch, especially when Marcus would attempt shots that seemed impossible. He would hit targets at 800 yards with consistency that defied explanation, and his groupings were so tight that the target sheets looked like they had been damaged by a single, perfectly placed shot. But Marcus never bragged about his abilities. When fellow guards asked about his weekends, he would simply say he enjoyed the countryside. When they pressed for details, he would change the subject or excuse himself to return to his duties. This only added to the mystery surrounding him, and some of the younger guards began to make jokes about their silent colleague. "Probably spends his weekends knitting," one guard named Peters would say, causing laughter among the group. "Or maybe he collects stamps. Can't imagine Thompson doing anything exciting." The comments never seemed to bother Marcus, who would simply adjust his uniform and return to his position, his expression unchanged. The truth was that Marcus found peace in his shooting practice. It connected him to memories of his grandfather, and the precision required helped calm his mind after long days of standing guard. He had no interest in showing off or proving himself to anyone. The skill was personal, something that belonged to him and the memory of the man who had shaped his character. As months passed, Marcus's reputation as the quiet, unremarkable guard became firmly established. Officers would assign him to the most routine posts, confident that he would stand his ground without causing any trouble. His performance reviews were always satisfactory but never outstanding. He was seen as reliable but not particularly ambitious or talented. Little did anyone know that Marcus's quiet dedication to his craft was preparing him for a moment that would change everything. His grandfather's lessons about patience, discipline, and precision were about to be put to the ultimate test, and the same colleagues who had dismissed him as ordinary We're about to discover that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who say the least. Marcus continued his routine, unaware that fate was preparing an opportunity that would finally reveal the extraordinary skills hidden beneath his unremarkable exterior. The quiet royal guard was about to become the center of attention in a way that no one, including himself, could have predicted. The announcement came on a cold Tuesday morning in November. Colonel Harrison gathered all the guards in the main briefing room, his stern face more serious than usual. The room buzzed with nervous energy as soldiers whispered among themselves, wondering what could be so important that it required pulling everyone from their regular duties. "Gentlemen," Colonel Harrison began, his voice cutting through the chatter like a blade, "we have received a rather unusual request from the Special Air Service. They are conducting a joint training exercise and have specifically asked for volunteers from our unit to participate in a marksmanship competition." The room fell silent. The SAS was legendary among British forces, known for having some of the best soldiers in the world. Their reputation for excellence in every area of military operations, especially marksmanship, was unmatched. The idea of Queen's Guards competing against them seemed almost laughable. Colonel Harrison continued, "This is not mandatory, but it is an opportunity to represent our unit and show that the ceremonial guards are also capable soldiers. The competition will test long-range shooting skills, precision, and performance under pressure. Any volunteers?" Several hands shot up immediately. Sergeant Williams was first, followed by Peters and half a dozen other guards who considered themselves decent shots. Marcus remained seated, his hands folded in his lap, showing no interest in volunteering. "Thompson," Colonel Harrison called out, noticing Marcus's lack of enthusiasm. "You haven't raised your hand. Not interested in representing your unit?" Marcus looked up, meeting the colonel's gaze. "With respect, sir, I don't think it would be appropriate. There are more qualified soldiers here who would better represent our capabilities." This response caused a ripple of quiet laughter among the other guards. Peters leaned over to his friend and whispered, "Smart move. At least Thompson knows his limitations." Even Sergeant Williams smirked, thinking that Marcus was being wise to avoid the embarrassment of competing against elite soldiers. Colonel Harrison studied Marcus for a moment. There was something in the young guard's demeanor that struck him as odd. Most soldiers would either jump at the chance for glory or make excuses about why they couldn't participate. Marcus's response was different, humble but not fearful. "I insist," Colonel Harrison said firmly. "Every guard will participate. This is about unit representation, not individual glory. Besides, it will be good experience for all of you." Marcus nodded respectfully. "Yes, sir. I'll do my best to represent the unit honorably." The other volunteers exchanged glances, some feeling sorry for Marcus and others barely suppressing their amusement. They all knew this would not end well for the quiet guard who barely spoke and had never shown any particular military prowess beyond standing perfectly still for hours. Over the next week, the selected guards began preparing for the competition. Sergeant Williams organized practice sessions at the base's shooting range, where the volunteers could sharpen their skills. The range was basic compared to what Marcus was used to, with targets set at standard distances that most military personnel trained on. During these practice sessions, Marcus's performance was deliberately modest. He hit his targets consistently but didn't stand out from the group. He was careful not to reveal the true extent of his abilities, taking shots that were good enough to be respectable, but not so impressive as to draw attention. His fellow guards remained unimpressed, and some even offered him tips on improving his stance and breathing. "Try to relax more, Thompson," Peters suggested after watching Marcus take a series of shots. "You're too tense. That's why your groupings aren't tighter." Marcus thanked him politely and continued practicing, secretly amused by the advice. Sergeant Williams was more direct in his assessment. "Look, Thompson, I appreciate that you're trying, but maybe you should focus on not embarrassing us too badly. The SAS boys are going to be world-class. Just do your best and try to learn something from watching them." The night before the competition, Marcus lay in his bunk thinking about his grandfather. The old man had always taught him that true strength came from knowing when to reveal your capabilities and when to keep them hidden. "A wise hunter doesn't show his hand until the moment is right," his grandfather had said. "Let others underestimate you. That's when you have the greatest advantage." Marcus had lived by this philosophy throughout his military service. He had watched other soldiers struggle for recognition and advancement, often burning themselves out in the process. He preferred to stay in the background, observing and learning, waiting for the right moment to step forward. The competition was scheduled to take place at a military facility outside London, where the SAS conducted some of their advanced training. The selected guards would travel there by bus, and the event was expected to last most of the day. Colonel Harrison had made it clear that their performance would reflect on the entire Queen's Guard unit. As Marcus packed his gear, he included his grandfather's old rifle cleaning kit, a habit he had maintained since joining the military. He also brought a small photograph of his grandfather, which he always carried during important moments. The old man's weathered face seemed to smile at him from the picture, as if encouraging him to remember everything he had been taught. The other guards spent the evening before the competition discussing strategy and making predictions about how badly they would be outshot by the SAS soldiers. The mood was a mixture of excitement and resignation, with most accepting that they were about to be thoroughly humbled by some of the world's best marksmen. Marcus listened to their conversations without contributing much. He was mentally preparing himself for what was to come, running through breathing exercises and visualization techniques his grandfather had taught him. He knew that tomorrow would be different from his quiet weekends at the countryside range. Tomorrow, his skills would finally be put to the test in front of an audience that expected very little from him. As he drifted off to sleep, Marcus couldn't help but smile slightly. His fellow guards had no idea what they were about to witness, and neither did the SAS soldiers, who were probably preparing for what they assumed would be an easy victory over a group of ceremonial guards. The SAS training facility was unlike anything the Queen's Guards had ever seen. Nestled in the rolling hills of Herefordshire, the compound looked more like a small city than a military base. Modern buildings housing advanced equipment stood alongside obstacle courses that seemed designed to test the limits of human endurance. As their bus pulled through the main gate, the guards pressed their faces to the windows, taking in the impressive sight. "Welcome to Stirling Lines," announced Captain Reynolds, the SAS officer who had organized the competition. He was a lean man in his 40s with sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "You gentlemen are about to experience what we call a friendly competition, though I should warn you that we don't usually do anything halfway around here." The Queen's Guards climbed off the bus, their dress uniforms looking formal and somewhat out of place among the tactical gear and camouflage that dominated the facility. Several SS soldiers had gathered to watch the arrival, and Marcus could see them sizing up the visitors with expressions that ranged from curious to quietly amused. "This should be interesting," one SAS soldier murmured to his colleague, loud enough for the guards to hear. "Haven't seen ceremonial troops on a real range in years." The comment drew a few chuckles from the other elite soldiers, though they were professional enough not to be openly dismissive. Captain Reynolds led the group to a briefing room where the competition rules were explained. The event would consist of 3 stages, each designed to test different aspects of marksmanship. The first stage would be precision shooting at known distances, starting at 300 yards and extending to 800 yards. The second stage would involve shooting at moving targets from various positions. The final stage would be a mystery challenge that wouldn't be revealed until the end. "Each team will consist of 1 SAS soldier and 1 Queen's Guard," Captain Reynolds explained. "This isn't about us versus you. It's about seeing how well our different units can work together and learn from each other." Despite his diplomatic words, it was clear that everyone expected the SAS soldiers to carry their teams. Marcus found himself paired with Corporal David Mitchell, a sniper instructor who had served with the SAS for 8 years. Mitchell was friendly but clearly skeptical about his partner's abilities. During their brief introduction, he asked Marcus about his shooting experience. "I do some weekend practice," Marcus replied simply. "Nothing too serious." Mitchell nodded, trying to hide his disappointment. He had hoped to be paired with one of the more experienced guards like Sergeant Williams, who at least talked confidently about his shooting skills. Instead, he was stuck with the quiet one who seemed more interested in studying the equipment than discussing strategy. The other Queen's Guards were equally nervous about their pairings. Peters found himself with Sergeant James Hook, a veteran with multiple tours in Afghanistan. Sergeant Williams was paired with Corporal Sarah Bennett, one of the few female SAS snipers, and reportedly one of the best shots in the unit. As the teams prepared for the first stage, Marcus quietly observed the SAS soldiers setting up their equipment. Their rifles were state-of-the-art precision instruments worth more than most people's cars. Every piece of gear was carefully maintained and perfectly adjusted. The soldiers moved with the confidence of people who had done this thousands of times before. "Quite a setup they have here," Marcus commented to Mitchell as they walked to the firing line. "These rifles can hit a target at over a mile in the right hands," Mitchell replied. "We'll be starting much closer than that, so it should be manageable for everyone." He was clearly trying to be encouraging, but his tone suggested he was already planning to do most of the shooting himself. The first targets were set at 300 yards, which was considered an easy distance for trained military snipers. The SAS soldiers took their positions with practiced ease, their breathing controlled and their movements precise. The Queen's Guards looked less comfortable, adjusting their positions multiple times and checking their equipment nervously. Marcus lay down next to Mitchell and examined the rifle he had been assigned. It was a military standard weapon, well maintained but nothing special. He adjusted the scope and checked the action, noting how different it felt from his grandfather's old hunting rifle. Despite the difference, the fundamentals remained the same: breathing, sight alignment, trigger control. "Take your time," Mitchell advised. "There's no rush. Just focus on hitting the target somewhere in the scoring rings." His expectations were clearly modest, and Marcus could see that the SAS soldier was already resigned to compensating for his partner's likely poor performance. The shooting began with the SAS soldiers demonstrating their skills. Each shot was precise, hitting the target in tight groups near the center. Their movements were smooth and professional, and they made it look effortless. The watching Queen's Guards began to feel even more nervous as they realized just how outclassed they were. When it was the guards' turn to shoot, the results were predictably mixed. Some managed decent shots at the 300-yard line, while others struggled to hit the target at all. Sergeant Williams did better than most, earning a nod of approval from his SAS partner. Peters managed to keep his shots on target, but nowhere near the precision his teammate had demonstrated. Then it was Marcus's turn. He settled into his shooting position with deliberate care, taking longer than the others to get comfortable. Mitchell watched with growing impatience, worried that they were falling behind the other teams. "Remember, just hit the target," he whispered. "Don't worry about where." Marcus nodded and lined up his shot. He controlled his breathing exactly as his grandfather had taught him, feeling his heartbeat slow as he focused on the target. The familiar calm descended over him, shutting out all distractions. When he squeezed the trigger, the shot felt perfect. 800 yards away, the target showed a clean hit just outside the center ring. It was a good shot, respectable for a guard who claimed to have limited experience. Mitchell looked pleased, though not particularly surprised. "Nice work," he said. "Better than I expected." What Mitchell didn't notice was the small smile that crossed Marcus's face as he prepared for the next shot. The quiet guard was just getting started, and he was beginning to enjoy himself more than he had expected. The competition was about to become much more interesting than anyone had anticipated. As the competition moved to longer distances, the atmosphere on the firing line began to change. The targets were now set at 500 yards, then 600, and finally 800 yards. At these ranges, even experienced military shooters could struggle with consistency, and the SAS soldiers expected their Queen's Guard partners to begin falling behind significantly. Marcus continued to surprise everyone with steady, accurate shooting. His shots weren't perfect, but they were consistently good, landing within the scoring rings with a reliability that made Mitchell take notice. "You said you only practice on weekends?" Mitchell asked, studying the target through his binoculars. "Because these aren't weekend warrior results." "I've had good instruction," Marcus replied modestly, preparing for his next shot. He was still holding back, shooting well enough to be respectable, but not so well as to draw unwanted attention. His grandfather's voice echoed in his mind. "Let them think they know what you're capable of. The surprise is your greatest weapon." The other Queen's Guards were struggling more visibly as the distances increased. Peters had missed the target entirely on his last two shots, and his SAS partner was having to coach him through the basic fundamentals. Sergeant Williams was doing better, but was clearly out of his depth compared to his professional counterpart. "This is harder than it looks," Williams muttered to Peters during a break. "These SAS boys make it seem like child's play, but hitting targets at 800 yards is serious business." He glanced over at Marcus, who was quietly cleaning his rifle. "Thompson's doing all right, though. Better than I would have expected. The comment reached the ears of several SAS soldiers who began paying more attention to the quiet guard. Corporal Bennett, Sergeant Williams's partner, mentioned to Captain Reynolds that one of the ceremonial guards was shooting surprisingly well for someone with limited experience. "Which one?" Reynolds asked, scanning the line of guards. "The quiet one on the end. Thompson, I think. His partner Mitchell seems pretty impressed with his consistency." Bennett pointed toward Marcus, who was methodically preparing for another shot. Reynolds studied Marcus for a moment, noting the careful way he handled his equipment and the calm confidence in his movements. Something about the guard's demeanor struck him as familiar. It reminded him of veteran snipers he had known, soldiers who had developed an almost meditative approach to precision shooting. As the first stage concluded, the scores were tallied. As expected, the SAS soldiers had dominated the competition, with their shots grouped tightly in the center rings across all distances. The Queen's Guards had performed respectably but were clearly outclassed, with one notable exception. Marcus's scores showed remarkable consistency across all ranges. While he hadn't achieved the tight groupings of the elite soldiers, his shots had remained accurate and stable, even as the distances increased. His 800-yard shots were particularly impressive, showing a level of skill that seemed inconsistent with his claimed experience. "Interesting pattern here," Captain Reynolds commented to Colonel Harrison, who had arrived to observe the final stages. "Most of your guards showed the expected decline in accuracy as we moved to longer ranges. But this Thompson fellow actually seemed to get more comfortable as the distances increased." Colonel Harrison looked at the score sheets with surprise. He had known Marcus for 3 years and had never seen any indication of exceptional marksmanship skills. The guard had always been reliable but unremarkable, content to blend into the background and avoid attention. Mitchell was becoming increasingly curious about his partner. During the break between stages, he approached Marcus with a more serious expression. "Level with me, Thompson. You've done this before, haven't you? I mean, really done this, not just weekend plinking." Marcus considered his response carefully. "My grandfather taught me to shoot when I was young. He was thorough in his instruction." "What kind of shooting did he teach you?" Mitchell pressed, sensing there was more to the story. "Hunting, mostly. Long-range hunting in the Yorkshire Hills." Marcus's answer was technically true, though it didn't reveal the full extent of his grandfather's military background or the intensive training he had received. Mitchell nodded, beginning to understand. "Yorkshire hunting can be serious business. Long shots across open country, wind reading, all that. No wonder you're comfortable with these distances." The second stage of the competition involved shooting at moving targets from various positions, standing, kneeling, and prone. This was designed to test adaptability and quick target acquisition, skills that were crucial in combat situations. The SAS soldiers approached this stage with obvious confidence, having trained extensively in dynamic shooting scenarios. For this stage, the teams would alternate between shooters, with each person taking turns at different targets. This meant that Marcus would be shooting independently, without Mitchell's guidance or support. The pressure was mounting, and several of the Queen's Guards were beginning to show signs of nervousness. "Remember," Captain Reynolds announced, "these targets will be moving at various speeds and patterns. You'll have limited time to acquire and engage each target. Focus on smooth tracking and natural point of aim." The first few teams struggled with the moving targets as expected. The combination of time pressure and unfamiliar shooting positions proved challenging for soldiers more accustomed to static ceremonial duties. Even Sergeant Williams, who had performed well in the first stage, found himself missing targets he would have hit easily if they had been stationary. As Marcus's turn approached, he could feel the eyes of both teams on him. Word had spread about his surprisingly good performance in the first stage, and people were curious to see how the quiet guard would handle the more dynamic challenges. Marcus stepped up to the firing line and took his position. The first target began moving across his field of view, a standard lateral movement at moderate speed. He tracked it smoothly, his rifle moving in a fluid arc that his grandfather had drilled into him during countless hours of practice on clay pigeons and running game. The shot was clean, hitting the target center mass. The watching soldiers murmured their approval, but Marcus was already tracking the second target, which was moving in an erratic pattern designed to simulate evasive movement. Again, his shot found its mark. By the time Marcus completed his sequence, he had hit 6 out of 7 targets, a performance that matched or exceeded most of the SAS soldiers. The silence on the firing line was notable, as both teams processed what they had just witnessed. Mitchell stared at his partner with new respect and growing suspicion. "Thompson," he said quietly, "I think we need to have a longer conversation about this grandfather of yours." The atmosphere around Marcus had completely changed by the time Captain Reynolds announced the final stage. What had started as polite indifference from the SAS soldiers had transformed into genuine curiosity and respect. Even his fellow Queen's Guards were looking at him differently, as if seeing him for the first time. "The mystery challenge," Captain Reynolds announced with a slight smile, "will test your abilities under the most demanding conditions we can create here safely. You'll be shooting at targets placed at 1,200 yards, well beyond normal engagement distances. The twist is that you'll be shooting in teams with one person spotting and calling corrections while the other shoots. 1,200 yards. The number sent a ripple of nervous energy through the Queen's Guards. Most had never even attempted shots at such extreme distances. Even some of the SAS soldiers looked thoughtful, recognizing that this would be a serious test of their skills. Furthermore, Reynolds continued, "The shooting positions will be field expedient. You'll need to set up using whatever natural support you can find. No benches, no perfect shooting rests. This simulates real-world conditions where you might need to take a critical shot without ideal setup time." Mitchell looked at Marcus with a mixture of excitement and concern. His partner's performance had been impressive, but 1,200 yards was a different level entirely. At that distance, factors like wind speed, temperature, and even the rotation of the Earth could affect bullet trajectory. "What do you think?" Mitchell asked. "Want to take the first shots, or should I start us off?" Marcus studied the distant targets through binoculars, noting the wind flags positioned at various points along the range. The breeze was moderate but shifting, creating complex patterns that would require careful reading. "I'd like to try the first sequence if you're willing to spot for me." Mitchell nodded, impressed by Marcus's confidence. "All right, but this is serious distance shooting. Don't be discouraged if it takes several shots to get on target. Even our best snipers need time to walk their shots in at this range." The teams began setting up at different firing points around a small hill that provided various natural shooting positions. Marcus found a spot where he could use a fallen log for support, positioning himself carefully to create the most stable shooting platform possible. The position reminded him of countless hours spent with his grandfather in the Yorkshire countryside, learning to work with whatever natural support the terrain provided. "Target is 1,200 yards. Bearing directly to your front," Mitchell called out, studying the target through his spotting scope. "Wind is 3 to 5 miles per hour, variable direction. Temperature is 15 degrees Celsius, humidity moderate." Marcus nodded, absorbing the information while making mental calculations. His grandfather had taught him to read environmental conditions instinctively, and years of practice had turned these calculations into second nature. He adjusted his scope and settled into his shooting position. "Take your time," Mitchell advised. "At this distance, everything has to be perfect. Breathing, trigger control, follow-through, any mistake gets magnified." The first few teams to shoot struggled visibly with the extreme distance. Shots landed wide of the targets, requiring multiple corrections to even get close to the scoring area. The SAS soldiers performed better than their Queen's Guard partners, but even they needed several attempts to achieve consistent hits. Sergeant Williams and his partner managed to hit the target on their 4th shot, earning applause from the watching soldiers. Peters and his teammate required 7 shots before connecting, though their final shots were accurate. The performance gap between the elite soldiers and the ceremonial guards was exactly what everyone had expected. Then it was Marcus's turn. He settled into position behind his rifle, feeling the familiar calm descend over him. At 1,200 yards, the target appeared impossibly small through his scope, but Marcus had practiced shots at similar distances during his private training sessions. His grandfather's old hunting rifle had been capable of such accuracy, and the military weapon he was using now was arguably superior. "Wind has shifted slightly," Mitchell called out. 2 to 3 miles per hour from the left now. Still manageable, but you'll need to compensate." Marcus made a minute adjustment to his aim point and controlled his breathing. The world seemed to narrow down to just him, the rifle, and the distant target. Time slowed as he applied gentle pressure to the trigger, following through exactly as he had been taught decades earlier. The sound of the shot echoed across the range, followed by a moment of tense silence as everyone waited for the spotter to call the result. Mitchell's voice broke the quiet with obvious surprise. "Hit! Center mass, just left of the bullseye." A murmur of impressed comments rippled through the watching soldiers. First shot hits at 1,200 yards were rare, even among experienced long-range shooters. Mitchell looked at Marcus with new eyes, beginning to realize that his partner was far more skilled than anyone had suspected. "Lucky shot," one of the SAS soldiers called out good-naturedly. "Let's find out," Marcus replied calmly, already preparing for his second shot. This time he made a small adjustment based on where his first shot had landed, compensating for the slight wind drift Mitchell had called out. The second shot hit even closer to the center of the target. By the time Marcus completed his sequence of 5 shots, he had achieved a grouping that rivaled the best performance of the day. The silence that followed was profound, as both teams processed what they had just witnessed. Captain Reynolds walked over to examine the target through his high-powered spotting scope, studying the tight cluster of bullet holes with growing amazement. When he turned back to the group, his expression had changed completely. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying across the range, "I think we need to have a conversation about what we just saw. That shooting performance was not the work of a weekend hobbyist." Colonel Harrison approached Marcus with a confused expression. "Thompson, in 3 years of service, you've never mentioned any competitive shooting experience or specialized training. Where exactly did you learn to shoot like that?" Marcus stood up slowly, brushing dirt from his uniform. He could feel dozens of eyes focused on him, waiting for an explanation that would make sense of what they had just witnessed. The quiet royal guard who had been dismissed and overlooked was suddenly the center of attention, and there was no way to fade back into the background. "My grandfather was Robert Thompson," Marcus said quietly. "Some of you older soldiers might remember the name. He served as a sniper in the Second World War, then spent 30 years training marksmen for the British Army." The name hit the assembled soldiers like a physical blow. Robert Thompson was a legend in military shooting circles, credited with some of the longest confirmed kills in British military history, and responsible for training generations of elite marksmen. Mitchell stared at his partner with dawning comprehension. "You're telling me you were personally trained by Robert Thompson? The Robert Thompson who wrote the manual on precision shooting that we still use today?" Marcus nodded simply. "He was my grandfather. He taught me everything he knew, starting when I was 8 years old. I've been practicing what he showed me for over 20 years. The revelation changed everything." Suddenly, Marcus's performance made perfect sense, and the assembled soldiers began to understand that they had been witnessing something truly exceptional. The news of Marcus's true identity spread through the SAS facility like wildfire. Within an hour of his revelation, word had reached the highest levels of command. Robert Thompson's name was known to every serious marksman in the British military, and the fact that his grandson had been serving quietly as a ceremonial guard seemed almost impossible to believe. Colonel Harrison stood in Captain Reynolds' office, still processing what he had learned. 3 years, he said, shaking his head. 3 years he's been under my command, and he never said a word about his background, never requested special assignments, never mentioned his grandfather's legacy, never even hinted at his capabilities." Captain Reynolds leaned back in his chair, equally amazed. "Sir, I've seen a lot of exceptional shooters in my time with the SAS. What your man demonstrated today wasn't just good shooting, it was world-class precision marksmanship, the kind of skills that take decades to develop and can't be faked." Meanwhile, Marcus found himself surrounded by curious soldiers, all wanting to hear more about his grandfather and his training. The quiet guard who had preferred to remain in the background was now the center of attention, fielding questions from some of the most elite soldiers in the British military. "Tell us about the training," urged Sergeant Hook, the veteran SAS soldier who had been partnered with Peters. Robert Thompson was legendary for his methods. What was it like learning from him directly? Marcus was quiet for a moment, remembering the countless hours spent in the Yorkshire countryside with his grandfather. "He was patient but demanding," Marcus said finally. "Every session started with the basics: breathing, stance, trigger control. He wouldn't let me move to longer distances until I could hit a coin at 50 yards 10 times in a row." The assembled soldiers listened intently as Marcus described his grandfather's training methods. The old sniper had believed that precision shooting was 90% mental discipline and only 10% technical skill. He had taught Marcus to read wind patterns by watching grass and leaves, to calculate distance by studying terrain features, and to remain calm under pressure by practicing meditation techniques he had learned during the war. He used to say that a good marksman could hit a target, Marcus continued, but a great marksman could hit exactly what he intended to hit, when he intended to hit it regardless of conditions. Everything was about consistency and mental control. Corporal Mitchell had been listening quietly, but now he spoke up. Marcus, why didn't you ever mention this? Why hide your abilities? With your background, you could have requested assignment to any unit in the military. The SAS, Special Reconnaissance Regiment, even specialized training roles. Marcus's response surprised everyone. My grandfather taught me that true skill didn't need recognition or titles. He said the most dangerous people were often the ones nobody noticed. I joined the Queen's Guard because I wanted to serve my country with honor, not because I was looking for glory or special treatment. The humility in his answer impressed the SAS soldiers even more than his shooting had. In a world where many soldiers sought recognition and advancement, Marcus's genuine modesty was refreshing and rare. But surely you must have wanted to use your skills more actively, pressed Corporal Bennett. Standing guard duty when you could be serving in specialized roles seems like a waste of exceptional talent. Marcus shook his head. My grandfather always said that every role in the military has value. The guard who protects important locations with dedication serves just as honorably as the sniper who takes difficult shots. I found meaning in my duties and I was content. Captain Reynolds had been observing this conversation with growing interest. He recognized something in Marcus that went beyond just technical shooting skills, the quiet confidence and philosophical approach to military service that characterized the best special operations soldiers. Marcus, Reynolds interjected, would you be interested in a demonstration? We have some advanced equipment here that I think you might find interesting. Consider it a professional courtesy to Robert Thompson's legacy. The group moved to another part of the facility, where the SAS maintained their most sophisticated shooting equipment. Reynolds led them to a rifle that represented the cutting edge of military technology, a precision weapon worth more than most people's annual salary, equipped with advanced optics and environmental sensors. This is set up for extreme long-range work, Reynolds explained. The computer system can calculate ballistic solutions for distances up to 2 miles, accounting for everything from air pressure to the Coriolis effect. Our best snipers use equipment like this for the most challenging shots. Marcus examined the rifle with obvious appreciation. The technology was far advanced from anything his grandfather had used, but the fundamental principles remained the same. What's the target distance? He asked. 1,500 yards, Reynolds replied. There's a steel target on the far hillside. We use it for final qualification shoots. Most soldiers need multiple attempts even with this advanced equipment. The watching soldiers followed Reynolds and Marcus to an elevated shooting position that provided a clear view of the distant target. At 1,500 yards, the steel plate was barely visible even through binoculars. The wind conditions were challenging, with variable breezes creating complex patterns across the valley. Marcus settled behind the advanced rifle, taking time to familiarize himself with the sophisticated scope and computer system. The technology was impressive, but he found himself relying more on his grandfather's teachings than on the electronic aids. Years of reading natural conditions had given him an intuitive understanding of ballistics that no computer could replicate. The system is showing a firing solution, Reynolds called out, reading the display. Wind compensation, elevation adjustment, everything calculated automatically. Marcus studied the readout, then made several manual adjustments to the scope. The computer is close, he said, but it's not accounting for the thermal currents rising from that rock face on the left. There's an updraft that will affect the bullet path in the final 200 yards. Reynolds looked at him with surprise. How can you possibly know that from here? The way the grass is moving at different elevations, the heat shimmer patterns, the way birds are flying through that area, Marcus explained. My grandfather taught me to read the entire environment, not just the immediate shooting position. He made one final adjustment and settled into his shooting position. The advanced rifle felt different from the weapons he was accustomed to, but the fundamentals remained unchanged. Control breathing, clear sight picture, smooth trigger press, perfect follow-through. The shot broke cleanly, and the sound echoed across the valley. Seconds later, the distinctive ring of bullet-striking steel carried back to the shooting position. Marcus had hit the target on his first attempt, at a distance that challenged even the most experienced military snipers. The silence that followed was profound. Even the SAS soldiers accustomed to exceptional performance were impressed by what they had witnessed. Hitting a target at 1,500 yards with an unfamiliar rifle, on the first shot, went beyond skill into the realm of artistry. "Bloody hell," breathed Sergeant Hook. "I've been shooting for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like that." Captain Reynolds was already formulating plans. A marksman of Marcus's caliber could be invaluable to special operations, and keeping such talent hidden in ceremonial duties seemed almost criminal. But he also recognized the character that had kept Marcus content in his current role, and he knew that any approach would need to respect the young soldier's values and motivations. As the group prepared to return to the main facility, word came that senior officers from multiple units were requesting to meet with Marcus. His demonstration had attracted attention at the highest levels, and decisions were being made about his future that would change everything. The quiet royal guard, who had preferred anonymity, was about to discover that extraordinary abilities, once revealed, could never again be hidden. 6 months later, Marcus Thompson stood in a very different uniform, preparing for a mission that would have seemed impossible during his days as a ceremonial guard. The quiet soldier who had once been overlooked and dismissed was now a key member of a joint task force, his exceptional marksmanship skills finally being used to their full potential. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. After his demonstration at the SAS facility, Marcus had been approached by representatives from multiple elite units, all eager to recruit someone with his rare combination of skills and character. The offers had been tempting: specialized training, advanced equipment, prestigious assignments that would have made any soldier proud. But Marcus had surprised everyone once again with his response. Rather than jumping at the most glamorous opportunity, he had requested time to consider his options carefully. His decision, when it came, reflected the same thoughtful approach that had characterized his entire military career. He had chosen to remain with the Queen's Guard but accept a dual role that allowed him to serve both ceremonial and operational functions. 3 days a week he continued his duties at Buckingham Palace, maintaining the traditions and discipline that had first drawn him to the service. The other days were spent training with special operations units and preparing for assignments that required his unique skills. "It's the best of both worlds," Colonel Harrison had remarked when the arrangement was finalized. "We keep one of our most dedicated guards, and the military gains access to exceptional talent when it's needed most." The first real test of Marcus's new role had come during a hostage situation at the British Embassy in a troubled region overseas. Intelligence indicated that terrorists had taken staff members captive and were making demands that couldn't be met. A rescue operation was being planned, but the embassy's location presented unique challenges for traditional assault methods. Marcus had been called in to provide overwatch for the rescue team. His job was to establish a shooting position over a mile from the embassy and provide precision fire support if needed. The distance was extreme, the conditions challenging, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. Working with a team of SAS operators, Marcus had spent 2 days studying the target building, calculating shooting solutions, and preparing for every possible scenario. His grandfather's training in patience and preparation proved invaluable as he methodically worked through each detail. When the operation began, Marcus lay prone on a rooftop nearly 2 kilometers from the embassy, his rifle trained on critical points around the building. For 3 hours he remained motionless, watching and waiting as the assault team maneuvered into position. The call came suddenly. "Overwatch, we have a hostile with a clear shot at our entry point. Can you neutralize?" Marcus acquired the target through his scope, a terrorist positioned at a window with a rifle aimed at the rescue team. The distance was 1,800 yards with challenging wind conditions and the added pressure of knowing that lives hung in the balance. Everything his grandfather had taught him came together in that moment. The breathing techniques, the mental discipline, the ability to remain calm under extreme pressure. Marcus made his calculations, adjusted for conditions, and took the shot. The terrorist dropped instantly, never knowing what had hit him. The rescue team entered the building successfully, and all hostages were recovered safely. Marcus's single shot had made the difference between success and potential disaster. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the entire operation was what happened afterward. When the team returned to base and the mission reports were filed, Marcus quietly returned to his regular duties. There were no requests for media interviews, no attempts to leverage his success into career advancement, no boasting about his crucial contribution. A week later, tourists at Buckingham Palace were once again taking photographs of the silent guard in the red uniform. Completely unaware that they were looking at one of the most skilled marksmen in the world, Marcus stood at his post with the same humble dignity he had always shown, content to serve in whatever capacity was needed. Captain Reynolds visited him during one of his ceremonial duties, finding Marcus at his traditional post outside the palace. "Don't you ever get frustrated?" Reynolds asked during a quiet moment. "Knowing that you could be leading specialized units or training the next generation of elite soldiers?" Marcus considered the question thoughtfully before responding. "My grandfather used to say that the measure of a man isn't what he achieves, but how he serves. Whether I'm standing guard at the palace or taking a difficult shot to save lives, I'm serving my country. The location and the recognition don't matter." The conversation was interrupted by a group of school children on a tour, their teacher explaining the role of the Queen's Guard. The children stared up at Marcus with wide eyes, impressed by his tall hat and colorful uniform. One brave little girl asked if being a guard was exciting. Marcus smiled slightly, the only break in his professional demeanor. "Every day of service is an honor," he replied simply. "Even the quiet days." As the children moved on, continuing their tour, Reynolds shook his head in amazement. "You know, Marcus, I think your grandfather would be proud of the man you've become. Not just because of your shooting skills, but because of your character." Marcus nodded, his eyes focused on the horizon. He always said that the most important target to hit was the right choice, and that sometimes the hardest shot to take was no shot at all. I try to remember that in everything I do. The quiet Royal Guard had become something of a legend within military circles, though few outside those circles would ever know his story. His fellow guards still called him Thompson, still saw him as the reliable, modest soldier who never caused trouble or sought attention. They had no idea that their colleague had capabilities that placed him among the elite marksmen of the world, and Marcus preferred it that way. He had learned to balance his extraordinary abilities with ordinary humility, serving his country with distinction, while remaining true to the values his grandfather had instilled in him. The man who had once been laughed at for his quiet nature had proven that sometimes the most powerful people are those who choose when and how to reveal their strength. In a world that often celebrated loud achievements and public recognition, Marcus Thompson continued to find satisfaction in quiet service, knowing that true worth isn't measured by applause but by the willingness to stand guard, whether at a palace gate or behind a rifle scope, whenever and wherever duty called.